Welcome back to session 3. So we've got this week and next week. We're halfway through our painting. So kind of gauge your progress just from there. This painting had a lot going on, and I know it was challenging, and I know that in some ways it was somewhat tedious and not the kind of loose flowing watercolors that sometimes are more fun to do. But I do believe there's a lot of valuable lessons in this kind of an exercise. And what I hope for you is what I got out of this kind of a technique and step-by-step instruction was that I applied that to other paintings. And I've had success with this particular technique with other paintings. And so that's what I hope for with you. Even if you apply this to something other than still life, I think there's a lot of value in it. So we'll hop into a couple of things that I have just jotted down on the whiteboard. If you have any questions, either for the group or just if you just want to ask me anything that you're confused about or just not sure about or that I haven't covered, please ask. And then we'll go around the room and you can critique or share anything that you have going, whether it's this painting or something else. If you have some tips, maybe you've watched a YouTube video, maybe you've bought some new materials, anything that would benefit the group, tips and raves, please share that. And then I want to briefly, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this right now, but I want to briefly just introduce the idea of using illustration board instead of watercolor paper. There's a couple of advantages and there's a couple of disadvantages. There's no Goldilocks surface or perfect surface to paint on, but they all have benefits. So with the illustration board, I've used lots of different types of illustration boards over the years, and over the years my favorite has always been the Crescent brand, and this is cold pressed, so it's just like watercolor paper. You can buy the smoother, less absorbent, and less textured hot press. But the cold press for the technique that we're doing here and the kind of technique that I pretty much always do, the cold pressed is by far my preference of surface. With the illustration board, you can buy student grade, just like watercolor paper. You can buy professional. This is the Crescent 110 cold pressed. And you can get this, I looked it up on Dick Blick the other day. I bought this at mine and yours. You can find this around. I think Hobby Lobby was carrying this. So you can get this stuff pretty readily. It's seemed to me that a full sheet, a large sheet, like 20 by 30, was about $6 or $7, I think, the other day when I looked it up at Dick Blick. So, it's pretty reasonable, and you can cut it. I have a large paper cutter at home, but you can score it, just with the utility knife, and just be careful because it can tear. But anyway, this is a really fun surface. It works really, really well for wet on wet watercolors. I have one example here. This one, especially on the border, I used some flicking of water. I spritzed it with a spray bottle. I think I did a little bit of salt. You can do any of the techniques that you do with watercolor paper. You can get them to work with illustration board. The other benefit is you don't need to stretch it. It will bow, so that's why this board is like this. But you can what I usually do is put a couple of magazines underneath it and put some weight on the corners and just let it get pressed down. I did this painting years ago. I wasn't thrilled with it, so I really haven't framed it. And I was talking to Lou earlier. I noticed some of the colors have dulled a little bit, so I could punch this up. Here's the other huge advantage to using illustration board, though, is at this point, if I wanted to, I could actually use colored pencil over the top of this paint. So you can, I've used this technique for a long time until I finally got to a certain point where I just said a lot of shows that you would enter would be water media only, that kind of thing. So I didn't want to have a mixed media. But it's fantastic what you can do with the colored pencil on top of the watercolor. And as opposed to just doing, this is illustration board, so you could draw on this. You could just do, regular graphite pencil. You can do colored pencil. I used to do illustrations just using pencil with no watercolor. And what I found was that by putting the base of the watercolor down, it it sped up the process tremendously. It was so much easier to get those deep, rich areas by having a watercolor base under the colored pencil. So if you're interested, I've prepped up a couple of things. I'm hoping maybe we'll have time later today to do a mini pour, a small pour with just, and if you haven't done a watercolor pour, this will help. And tons of YouTube videos are out there, lots of fun things, some really wild and really thick and abstract and all kinds of fun ideas. The pours that I usually do are fairly diluted so that they're not too overpowering. Here's one that got out of control and got super rich and dark, but it was still fun. So this one was, all I've done is the pour so far, and the texture is salt. And it was super wet, and it will create those kind of flows. But the red was highly concentrated, so I'll give you guys a couple of hints about. Nice.
I did this one in your calligraphy class.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you can save those, and there are lots of things you can do with this now. You could put another image on top of this. This technique works fantastic for portraits. I know lots of you have done that before, and the technique that I learned, and I didn't invent this technique at all, is that you do the pour, let it completely dry like this, and then take your drawing or draw on here, or transfer it on however you want to do it. Use cerulean blue around the portrait, and it's almost it's a fantastic way to create a three-dimensional look to it. So if we do another class, that would be an option that we could do. It's a whole other world of watercolor, but the fun thing about this is the randomness, the fact that the colors are going to do what they're going to do. You never know exactly what it's going to be like, and that's part of the beauty of it. So if you're interested, I hope you are, but we'll do a short pour here a little bit later. So for today's painting, for our still life, the plan is to remove the masking fluid if you haven't done that already. And I haven't done that on this example here, so we'll pull that off. We're going to just, again, look at the elements of this piece, which is, the pottery, the tablecloth, and the foliage, and just get that developed to where you want it to be. Take it as far as you want. You can spend a lot of time on these kind of details, and I think the more time you put into it, probably the better the result that you're going to achieve. So that's where we'll go after that. And then if time allows, or if we're there, we will get a base coat, at least the first coat of the black on the background. And if the mixture that creates this kind of a off black, or not the midnight black, are the three primary colors. And the rich hues that Sun Warren taught me, and that I suggest, is go with alizarin crimson, which is the red, indigo blue, deepest hue of blue, and the sepia, which is a yellow. So you're mixing the three primary colors, and you get this. And if you don't have those colors, I'm sure we can share with you, or you could take black and mix a color. And I would suggest red. So if you have black, mix some red into it. Just take that edge off of that pitch black so that it's not so domineering to the background. So that's kind of the plan. So if you have not removed masking fluid before, just make sure your hands are clean, and you really just, if you applied it properly, it should just peel right off, just like that. And they do make, they're called rubber cement pickups, and I've got one over here. I'll share it with you. It's just a little rectangular rubber tool, and you can rub it across. But really, unless you have a ton of mask that you've done, I find that you have better control with your fingers. You can just kind of tell where the rubber cement is. And so I just rub it off like that, and just make sure that it's off the surface of the paper. A lot of times too, if you started especially a big area, for example the lemons, I masked the entire lemon on this second attempt here because I wasn't happy With the other one, a lot of times you can just pull the whole piece off like that. So just get your masking off first if you're ready for this step today. And I usually just check everywhere. And I think that's it. So that should return your paper to whatever color you had underneath the mask, in this case white. You can mask multiple times. So for example, if I wanted to mask a window up here, let's say, I could go ahead and reserve this gold. So I could just take masking fluid, maybe do 4 rectangles to show a window, and then you can paint over the top of that. So you can do multiple layers of masking, and it's very useful. There's a lot of ways that can be used. So what I'd like to demo real quickly is how to get the look of basically what was happening here was the blue skies on the top, and then the sun was breaking the horizon. So I went from blue to yellow. Blue and yellow will give you green, so if you don't want green sky, just leave a little border in between those colors. Just be mindful of the fact that if you don't want real bright green, be cautious there. And then with the lemons, now this would be a good example of how you could use mask again. I could now reserve these highlights just with dots of mask, and that would probably be a good idea for me to do. Then you can paint the lemons completely yellow. The other thing you could do is paint them yellow and just take a tissue and just touch those 3 spots and lift it off. So let me do a little bit of this. Let me go ahead and do this window right here. So I'm going to use a little bit of this peacock blue and maybe add a little bit of this is ultramarine blue. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to start wet on dry, so the paper's dry here. And one thing I would suggest when you pull mask off is soften, just be aware of the idea of softening this boundary, because sometimes it can look sort of too non-integrated. It's not, it looks like this is completely separate from the background. So if you soften the edge, and by softening the edge, just sort of work the boundary between the colors, it'll kind of get those to blend and kind of soften it up a little bit. So I'm going to go from, and you can see I'm using very little pigment here now. I'm just going to pull this down into white, and then I'm going to go ahead and get my yellow going. So any yellow would work. A cadmium yellow would be good.
What kind of blue did you put with the peacock blue?
I put a little bit of ultramarine, I think, Kathleen. If you don't have that, cerulean blue would actually work just great for this whole, that whole little bit right there. So I'm going to take a little bit of yellow, and here's the sun breaking the horizon. And then I'm just diluting this yellow because, again, I don't want it to get super green. And I'm going to go ahead and pull this reference photo over here. And this was interesting. This is one of the beauties of painting, is that you have to really see. You have to look at what you're painting. And it's kind of that drawing on the right side of the brain thing where you say, oh, okay, well, there's a vase. I know what a vase looks like. In my mind's eye, that's a vase. Whereas when you're painting it, even if you turn it upside down, you start to look at what's really going on there. And I realized that these 2 little highlights that are in here are actually the reflection of the saucer that the gravy bowl's in. So you start seeing things that, when you, at first glance, you kind of miss them. There's also that curve of the table line, which is the edge of the table being distorted by the curve of the vase. So those little things can just make a big difference. So just kind of, I think that's the beauty of paint. And it's not super important here that, I think what happened in this reflection was it's reflecting foliage that was outside, but it's just kind of a brownish, rusty color. So I'm going to grab a little bit of that Venetian red, maybe a little bit of I've got either Van Dyke brown. Yeah, Van Dyke brown, a little bit of this red. I'm going to dilute that down and just add a little. Now this could look too much like the vase, so I'm just going to put a dot there and just kind of dilute it and spread it around a little bit. And then later, there's a little division that was in the patio window, just the divider, so I can put that in later after this is dry. So anyway, I'm just getting the base coat on these reflections now. And then while we're here, there was definitely a glow that was happening, so I'm going to do a little bit of lifting. So I've got a stiffer bristled brush, and I'm right around the yellow on the terracotta. I'm going to wet it and try to lift a little bit. And this is where, you know, better quality paper and paints will be your friend. It will help you with that. And you can do as much or as little of that as you want. On a couple of my photos, this aura or this glow actually extended out over the background. So I didn't want to tackle it or didn't think it would be the best thing for this part, but that could be very interesting to give it that kind of that sheen or that glow. So right now what I'm doing is I'm just going to use the same idea going from blue to yellow, maybe back to blue on especially the highlights that are to the light source side, so to the left. Now some of these in here are very subtle. You've got, for example, you've got the lemons reflected in here. So let's just get a base coat down on those very, very quickly. I'm just going to put a little bit of yellow on the 3 lemons, the reflection of the 3 lemons. And these are windows back here, so I'm just going to pick up that same idea of yellow through the center and blue on the top. And before I do that, I'm actually going to drop in a little bit more pigment into the blue on the top of this reflection, this main highlight here.
Are you doing that just to break up those lines, or?
I just want to get it a little bit more obvious, I guess, a little darker. And this will dry lighter than it looks, but not, you know, not drastically different. I need to put this away because I keep.
How to ruin a painting
Yeah.
in one dip.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm just putting a little bit of blue on the top of each one of those windows just to kind of get a basic base color down. And same thing over here. And, you know, look at your reference photo. There's not so much, there is a little yellow on this, not quite as much as it, or as strong as it is over there. And I've noticed a whole bunch of places where I've missed masking fluid, so you'll probably notice that as you go. And then this is reflecting this highlight, I think, in the gravy bowl, but I'm going to keep it, you have artistic license. This looks basically like a rust color. And I think that's kind of what I did over there. Just what I would suggest with that is something, maybe even getting into like opera or a quinacridone red.
So this is the picture?
This is the photo.
Oh,
Yep.
okay.
Yep. Yeah, that's what I wanted right there. And let's put a base on the lemons while we're here. I think I'm just going to lay the pigment in and then lift the highlights.
What yellow is that you're using?
Let's see, I've got two yellows here. This one is cadmium yellow, and then the one next to it is permanent yellow light. So they're both, either one would be great. My lemons on the reference painting got muddy, and it was from trying to shadow them or make them look more rounded or three-dimensional. But I ended up feeling like they were very muddy looking. Okay, and then at this stage, just take your tissue if you want to punch in a highlight. The light's coming this way. You can look at the reference photos. And just kind of punch those up a little bit like that. So that's sort of the rough end of the highlights in the pottery.
Here's a question. What color are you going to do on the handles where it's that kind of creamy peachy color?
Yeah, I think I went with there, Don, is either a little bit. You could probably get mine with using something like yellow ochre. Or another color that's very similar to quinacridone gold. It's called New Gamboge.
Okay.
It's interesting. Maybe that with a little yellow. Let's just try it and see what we get.
Are these all Newtons?
No, I've got Winsor Newtons mixed in here too, Jenny. So I've got. What I tried to do with my map is just write WN for the Windsor Newtons, and then the rest of them are the mission.
Okay.
Yeah, I've got a long ways to go with organizing my palettes. That's why I haven't even started. I bought the new palette, but I haven't even added color to it yet. I'm going to come up with a plan. This took the first line version of this out to Office Depot and had them print it and put it on here. And it didn't fill the space. I had a huge amount of background is what it looked like. So I took it back out and had them blow it up even bigger. And that did afford me more opportunity to get the details in, especially on this foliage. Because this is probably the toughest part of it. And so let's talk about that just real quickly. I was hoping that when I put the black on that it was really going to pop. And it didn't quite pop as much as I had hoped. But still, sometimes a subdued value scale on a painting is okay too. But here's what I would suggest with this: is just always keep in mind when you're doing this kind of painting which direction the light source is coming from. Even though it looks like the whole thing's kind of the same value, it really isn't. There are definite, textures and folds in these petals and leaves that you can kind of accentuate to get the idea of where the light source is coming from, and also to separate one from the other. So what I kind of did here is just kind of start to build up the shapes, and for colors with that, things like quinacridone gold, browns, things like this Venetian red would be a nice color. Even a little bit of sepia mixed in with those. There's a little red, just kind of on the warm side of the color wheel. And let me just pick a spot that's real obvious. Right here, this petal or leaf is in front of this one. So I'm just going to get some shadow going here. And then this folds over, so this is the underside, and the top will be light. And so what I'm doing here is just kind of starting to get the shapes blocked in, and a lot of this will have black showing through. So I'm just going to put a dab of black in a couple of spots. This is black. This is black. All of this is black. And there's a little bit here, I believe. Yeah, there's actually a couple of little black spots. So if that helps you, you can kind of just delineate where the black is going to go inside of the petals. But now it's just a question of starting to kind of build up and show which is in front of which.
And you're building up with glazing, right?
Yes, yep, just different, slowly one coat after another.
Mhm.
Now I want to be careful not to touch the black there, so probably this isn't the greatest idea, but it was to illustrate where the black's going to be, because if I touch that, it's just going to,
Yeah.
it'll have a
So
field
that's
day.
why you need to let it dry.
Yes. Yeah, so this is actually black. Well, we've got a little bit of black right here. This isn't black, I guess that'll be it. Foliage. So you can see that this is just going to be a slow time consumer, but it will pay off if you put in the work on it to get the foliage to really, have some definition to it. With the grain, the stalks and the textures, I didn't. I kind of got an idea where those would be, but when I painted, I just kind of did a crosshatch type pattern and didn't worry about every single thing being exactly the way I thought it looked in the photo. I just tried to get the idea, some texture, and let the viewer's mind's eye kind of fill that in. Before I did all of that, though, I would also glaze a little bit more to kind of build up the base color.
Mm. Mhm.
Questions?
So did you just paint more yellow on that
I did.
after you took?
Yes, after I put this on here, Kathleen, what I did was I took quinacridone gold,
Yeah.
and I did just kind of glaze over this.
Oh.
And I didn't have to worry about, the
Uh-huh.
painting carefully, because it'll all be painted black later.
Oh.
So you could do this as much or as little as you want.
What's that one right there that you just did?
It's quinacridone gold,
Gold.
just more concentrated.
Oh, okay.
And if it's too much, just while it's wet, just dilute it a little bit.
Uh-huh. Oh.
So that's the crux of the details on the features or the elements of this still life. One other thing is the tablecloth. I think you're all working on that and doing very well, but my pottery is still floating. So if yours is floating, the solution to that is, remember, the light's coming in from the left-hand side, so shadow it a little bit under the right, more towards the right side, but underneath the pottery. Get it to sit down on the table.
Oh.
And so to do that, if you used the peacock blue or something like that, take that and add a touch of indigo, which is that dark blue that we'll use to mix the black for the background. So I've got a little bit of indigo and a little bit of the peacock blue here, and I'm going to work on some shadow under this saucer on the table. And so I'm just laying it on there and now softening the edge and letting the pigment mix right on the paper. And I'm just diluting it more as I work my way out away from the object that's casting the shadow. Now I picked up more pigment here because I'm right underneath this saucer. And so I'm just getting pigment on there, but I don't want it to come too far. I want it to be darker towards the right-hand side. And now I'm just softening it again.
You know, when you said last week that was more black?
This bowl?
That pot?
Yeah.
Well, I learned. I already know this, but I relearned. It was black is what it was. And it was really black.
Oh, okay.
And so then I had to lift it. And
Yeah.
I think what I should have done is, like Jeannie says, to put get a paper out, and then you can take your paintbrush before you put it to your painting.
Mm-hmm. Do a little test.
Yeah, a little test.
Yeah.
So you don't surprise yourself.
And that's a good point. And black is touchy because you can really overpower things. And the interesting thing about this painting, it doesn't have any black in it. When I took this workshop with this painter, I saw the finished painting reference photo that she sent, and then I looked at the supply list and there was no black on it. And that was before I understood about mixing the primary colors to get that dark of a black. I knew that mixing the primaries usually kind of gives you mud, but if you use these deepest hues right here, you will get just a really rich, almost a black. But it's not pitch black, which is the reason you do that. So I did do a little bit of little extra shading under the gravy bowl saucer here, and that's what I would continue to do on my other two pottery objects there to get it to seat it, to get it to sit down on the table. And then the other thing is just continue to work a little bit more on the creases on the tablecloth. And a lot of this was, I looked at the reference photo, but then I just kind of used my artistic license and just kind of guesstimated or just placed some wrinkles and creases on the tablecloth to break it up a little bit so it didn't look too flat. And with those, I sort of thought, where would the pottery kind of pinch the fabric and create a crease? But, whatever looks like it would work the best for you is what I would suggest you try with that.
Lift it off?
I lifted it off a little bit. Now that this is wet right here, Sandy, it would actually be super easy to do. You would just take a tissue and just, see how easily that lifted up right there. So you can just lift it with the tissue while it's wet and then put a little bit of darker shadow behind it later. All right, so that's the crux of the demo. If you have questions when I come around specifically with yours, please ask and I'll help you with that. And there are some cookies back on the table where Nellie's at, so help yourself, and I'll be around to check on your paintings. Quality is the best bet, but you can mix quality brands and have good luck with this. So the three colors are indigo for the blue, alizarin crimson as the red, and sepia as the yellow. And that's the one that really surprised me when I first heard about this, because I always thought of sepia as just kind of a dull brown, not almost like a black. But it's according to the artist that I learned this from, this is actually yellow, and this is the deepest hue of yellow in these watercolor paints.
Okay, that's the red is what was it?
Alizarin crimson. Stiff bristled brush.
Okay.
All right, I'm good to go.
You okay, Bill?
Yep.
Okay, so we're going to paint the background with our black mixture. And again, the colors are indigo, alizarin crimson, and sepia. And those are the three primary colors. You're mixing basically red, yellow, and blue together to create this real dark black-like background color. And I'm going to use a stiff bristled brush. I don't want to use my best brushes to mix this stuff up. It'll scruff up the bristles. So I'm using a cheaper brush, and I'm just going to take the pigment and I'm going to put a dollop or a glob, a little bit. I'm going to basically do equal parts. Equal parts of indigo, alizarin crimson, and sepia.
That's really pretty.
I love that color too.
Yeah, and this is the Mission brand. But again, you can mix brands. Just use quality paints. That'll be your best bet. And then the sepia, and this is Winsor Newton. And it's dark. I mean, it just looks super dark.
It's not a shiner.
Yeah, it does look a little more matte. Okay, so you can do this a couple of ways. The quickest way is probably just spritz some water in here. You don't want to dilute it too much, but you're probably going to be doing more than one coat on this anyway, so if it is kind of thin, it's not a big deal. And just spend some time making sure you mix together those three colors. One word of advice when you do this is mix enough paint to assure yourself that you can cover all that you have to do, because we're just guessing on the ratio here, and it could show up and look very different. Now, one thing I want to point out is there are a couple ways you could do this. I'm going to just free paint around my objects. If you don't feel like doing that, you can spend the time to mask this off, and then you could just paint the black. But you'd also have to apply the mask, let the mask dry, then do the painting, let the paint dry, and then remove the mask. So it's either way, it's not going to be quick and easy, but it'll be effective once you get this on there.
Well, you're just gonna.
And now what I did, what I would suggest with this, is I worked upside down, and I started, because I'm right-handed, I worked from left to right, so I wasn't working over myself, and I just applied this, and I'm still using this cheap brush right now, and it's going to work just fine, at least for these broad strokes, these simple areas. And, you know, kind of keep it moving along. Don't dawdle too much.
Look how I pops that out.
It really does. When you get this
Wow.
going, it'll really pop.
Oh, you're good.
Now, I'm going to switch now to a better brush. So I'm going to go ahead and go into either a 10 or 12, pretty good size watercolor brush. So I'm going to wet my brush, pick up this black. Whoops. All right, well, that's a good example of what not to do.
That lemon's going bad.
In every bunch you get.
Looks like mine.
This is a good. We were talking.
He'll be
Lou,
able
weren't
to
we
fix
talking
it.
about mistakes are good learning tools?
Yeah.
This is a mistake. So I'm going to grab a clean brush
Mm-hmm.
and see if I can lift this.
Mm-hmm.
And black is trickier. This dark is tricky because it's not going to want to completely lift. That's not
Oh,
bad.
that's bad. Oh. We're like, it's a magic. Is that something you have to do right away?
Yeah. Okay, and I'm afraid that's about as good as I'm going to get here. So,
Turns into a shadow.
how can we fix that? And what could we do with this?
Make that a
Turns
shadow,
into a
yeah.
shadow.
You could shadow it. The other
Paint orange
thing,
over it.
well, the other thing we
Make
could
it an
do-
orange, right?
Here's the fail-safe. You grab some gouache.
Oh, gosh.
So,
Gosh, save me.
gouache can be your savior. So this is opaque watercolor. So it's almost like the consistency of acrylic paints, but you can reconstitute this stuff.
Whiteout.
It's like whiteout, and it'll accept the other pigments. So I'm going to put a little bit of white gouache. Yep, and then I'm going to take my yellow.
Nice.
And so let me grab some cadmium yellow. And this could take more than one coat.
Ooh.
Because I can see already it's too white right now, but I needed the white to actually get the gouache on there. And see, this could be used as your highlights also. So I'm just going to let that sit like that, and then I'm going to give it another coat later with more. Don't wash that up or think it's dried up. So
And
it's
that's the name
no
of
good.
it, gouache?
Gouache.
Gouache. But it has to be white gouache.
I bought a set that has all the primary colors, and you can buy all kinds of colors in it. The white is the most versatile. This is the one you'll use more than any other. But yeah,
Is
buy
it
a
Windsor
good
News?
brand.
Yeah.
Yeah, buy a
The
good brand.
titanium white work too?
No,
No.
if you're talking about acrylics, it'll cover things, Kathleen, but it won't accept. You can't blend it once it
blend it.
dries. You're going to put it on there, and it's going to dry, and it's going to be there
Okay.
no matter what. Whereas this stuff, I can come back to this,
Mm-hmm.
and I can blend it out more. I can add more yellow to it.
okay.
It is a watercolor. It's just an opaque watercolor. So anyway, this could save you if you hurry like I did and make a mistake.
It's so amazing. It makes everything pop.
And I remember when I did the first coat, I just settled in, knowing that it's going to be about half an hour or an hour before you get this coated, but it's a real important step to this painting.
And now you have to pay attention to the lines, I suppose. Yeah.
Yep. One other word of caution, just make sure, everything else is dry before you start this, because it could be very easy to bleed the black into the other
My
color.
last one that we did,
Yes.
that other one we did with the black background.
Yeah,
I had touched up things and then painted the black, and now ran into my painting.
yeah, you really got to be careful.
I did too. Just mask around so the black doesn't.
So it's just a question of spending the time to do the black.
Mm-hmm.
And around the plants, that must be so detailed.
I just kind of brought it out maybe half an inch or so, Nancy, and the only issue I had with that is the first time I did it, it sort of had a halo because I think it was the brush work and maybe it dried a little differently. So the second coat made it look better, but there was a little halo around it.
And I find that I miss things in class. I just
But it does, once you do this, it really starts to pop.
That's good. You get right in.
Yeah, these brushes, even the big ones, come to a really nice point. Yeah, they're great.
Yeah, I'm going to order some. Now I gotta go do all this.
That's the technique. It really changes your painting. It suddenly looks like a different painting when you do this.
I actually